交換
And just like that, episode 11 is done, and now we have to wait a ridiculous amount of time before we see what happens next. And while this episode was incredible, there are definitely a decent amount of things that were changed between the anime and the manhwa that, depending on the person watching, could have changed the episode for the better or for worse. This episode was definitely one the anime decided to take a much more different approach because they took the liberty of changing a lot of scenes and add entirely new ones, starting off with the very first scene of episode 11. The episode starts with the floating head of one of the Japanese S-ranked hunters, a small touch the anime decided to add because this was never in the manhwa, and in my personal opinion, it was a very interesting detail to add and added perspective to the episode, so I was happy to see it. Now in the anime, they made the Ant King look like a much bigger blob that was flying around, but the manhwa made it seem like it was a much smaller and faster figure, almost like the only thing you could follow was its red eyes. Needless to say, the massacre happened exactly how it was supposed to, and then we move on with the story. A minor change that was added was Hunter Ma was fighting the ant was the color of it. While in the anime he is fighting a white ant, the manhwa it was a red one. Not a big deal, but a change nonetheless. The anime sure made it seem like the battle was a bit easier than it should have been, because while they were having a small chit-chat regarding how strong the ants were, in reality Cha Hae-in was constantly fighting ants while talking to the other hunters. And even though our handy-dandy dealer was keeping a cool head about the entire situation on both ends, Hunter Baek Yono is the one who looks slightly different. As I already mentioned, the anime is making it seem like they had a much easier time than they should have, while Baek is still in his normal state. In reality, he should have been mid-transformation already with his white hair and glowy eyes, using at least a portion of his power, not fighting in his full human form. Here is another thing where the anime decided to take a bit of liberty when it came to the story. While in the manhwa, there was a very short conversation regarding their speculations about how strong the Queen Ant's guard were. Then it followed up by Min Byuk starting to cast supportive spells. While the anime decided to add a bit more conversation regarding where they were headed, as well as Cha Hae-in using her keen sense of smell to pick up the scent of a powerful magic beast. Then Baek uses his eyes to try to scout deep inside the cave. To find them, he finally spots the Queen, and they have another moment about the power of friendship and how it's gonna be a very tough fight, but because they are together, they can surely win. And then they all start walking together. And people complain that solo leveling doesn't give its side characters enough screen time. Look at these guys. Anyway, we switch back to the Japanese, and I'm not sure why they decided to make this scene PG, and it was very bland in my opinion. In the anime, after Bolkad freaked out and froze half of Jeju Island with his ice wall, we saw the Ant King's shadow pop up and disappear, and then the ice breaks all over, and we switch back to another view. The way it should have looked, and it would have been much better way to get done this way in my opinion, was the way that the manhwa showed it to us, which was actually more terrifying as well. We don't even see the shadow of the Ant King. We see its claws slashing down the ice and just destroying it and blood pouring everywhere. Looks way more horrific than what the anime did. Now here is where the rearranging of scenes happened, because immediately after the encounter happened in the anime, it switched over to Emo Muscle Mommy and the insecure eye patch Maniac. But this was entirely newly added since it wasn't in the manhwa. In the manhwa, however, earlier I mentioned how the healer gave them all buffs by casting a supportive spell, and immediately after in the anime when Baek used his eyes to look down the cave, while the manhwa uses this scene after the whole interaction with the Ant King and the ice user from Japan. We see the Korean hunters just finish fighting some ants. They are upset they wasted too much time with them, while it was only 5 minutes. Baek is a little insecure about his power compared to Cha Hae-in because he states that in that short amount of time, she might have killed twice as many ants as he did, thanks to the buff she received from the healer. Then Sha states that she can smell the Queen in her guards, and Baek uses his eyes to check and confirm, which he does. Here is a massive change the anime did. The Queen was only supposed to have 8 guards, but the anime made it seem like she had close to 100. Now this is the time the healer casts a buff on all of them and makes them glow with a yellowish light, which seemed cool, but the manhwa did a much better job by showing exactly what kind of buff each of them got, including the cameraman, which was entirely cut out from the anime. Not necessarily something that would have been a huge deal, but I actually like the detail a lot more in the manhwa. In the anime, Hunter Ma decided to take the first step by getting in front of the group, getting big and using his taunt skill, but in reality, Walmartizing is the one who should have taken the initiative and state that he doesn't have to restrain himself. One of the ants, however, tried to get him from behind, and Hunter Lim saved him by telling him he got his back. something that was skipped in the anime to go straight to Baek's full-on transformation, which was actually done very well in the anime. Here's something else that was entirely crammed from the anime, the fact that Hunter Cha Hae-in can also taunt monsters. She uses her skill Quake of Provocation to get the attention of the guards. That way Ma can keep the queen busy while the guards are being taken care of. The anime goes on to show the people watching the fight everywhere, and while the same thing happened in the manhwa, there was a small change. The small interaction that this elderly couple was having because the husband refused to watch because he doesn't want to get his hopes up since they have lost a couple of times already, and turns out their only child was also lost during one of the previous raids on Jeju Island. This, though painful, should have been watched by them too. Nothing major to the story to remove that part, but it does add some sentimental value to it. Especially when it seems they might actually win and burst through the door crying saying they need to win already. Immediately after this in the manhwa, the fight is already started with the queen since she is only the one left. The anime decided to add an incredible amount of ants protecting the queen, so now they needed to fill the time by adding a bunch of flair and extra fighting, giving everyone a little bit of extra screen time, which, let's face it, I'm not mad about, but it needed to be pointed out. Then the fighting in the anime takes it to the queen, and after her death cry, the anime decided to finish off the fighting entirely and take care of her. On the manhwa, the story shifts a little bit. We see Baek notices she was likely calling for someone, and we switch over to seeing the signal jamming isn't working anymore. This didn't happen in the anime until much later on after the queen was defeated, which, by the way, they added a lot of flair to it. The entire sequence of Cha Hae-in flying up, opening her eyes, and fidget spinning on the queen, though very well done, was not part of the original story, not exactly like that at least. And then it happened, the Ant King was introduced. While the anime did a very good job at it, he was much more menacing in the manhwa, which is understandable because he was moving around so much in the anime. They needed to design him a little more fluid than the manhwa did. Also in the anime, it seemed more like the Ant King just shot his aura on them, but in reality he should have screamed a terrifying roar. Immediately after, the king was meant to just walk up to the queen, develop a mouth, and then scream again in a way that scared everyone so hard they fell to their knees. But the anime decided to add a cannibalistic side to it and made him eat the queen, then develop his mouth after, as he had evolved from eating her, which, let's face it, the anime looked great, but the amount of detail missing when we compare to the Ant King looking at them in the anime versus looking at them in the manhwa, you can tell which one of them gives you more chills. Speaking of fidget spinner Cha, what the anime did to her on this scene, making her spin like that in midair after the Ant King decided to recreate the "I like your cut G" meme.
I like your cut G.
On her was diabolical. Now, for the most part of the battle between the Ant King and the S-Rank Hunters was pretty spot on, but it decided to completely skip a short conversation between the two crew members on the ship regarding Goto Ryuji and him becoming a national level hunter, as well as a small mention of Lu Zhigang, which is understandable since the term national level hunter hasn't been introduced yet in the anime, but it is something that has been mentioned a few times before in the manhwa by now, likely something they want to introduce in the next season. And here comes the biggest miss of the entire episode. How dare they do Goto Ryuji this badly in the anime? When the Ant King showed up, Goto just looked back at him. But in the manhwa, he tried gaining a few aura points by shooting off his own aura. This panel also showed Goto daring the Ant King by claiming himself to be the king and grinning back and entirely cut out just made him look nonchalant. I don't understand who thought this would be a good idea. Sadly, Goto met his end shortly after and we never got to see his head plop, even though the manhwa did show it. Now, here is one change I absolutely loved to see, and that was the fact that in the manhwa, Jin-woo was just walking around the street when he got the distress signal from his shadow soldiers, and then he noticed what was going on and exchanged with one of them. The anime put him on top of a building overlooking the city, looking like the main character that he is, and we get that one majestic word that both upset everyone and also made people love the show even more.